NOS4A2.
What is up, everyone, and welcome back to our NOS4A2 After Show, where we break down the latest episode of the AMC series NOS4A2, based on the book by Joe Hill. I am one of your hosts, Griffin Schiller, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Mike Real School Johnson. I gave you a little, what do you call it, the little quotations like in between.
Nice.
Yeah, the nickname.
I have a nickname in parentheses. That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so how are you doing on this lovely Sunday?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It's Father's Day. You know, my wife has treated me to at least an hour of, quiet. Let's just call it that. She's been amazing all day because, I've been spoiled today. And as you can see, because like you said, we were talking before the show, I'm not sure how many of the viewers know that I'm Canadian. And I think you see this beautiful sunshine coming through my window. It's almost like LA. It's not like Toronto at all, but I think it has something to do with the Raptors and, as Drake says, it's God's plan. I don't know. I don't listen to Drake. But anyways, the funny thing is it's like God is just shining down upon this area. So you'll forgive the little halo that I have behind me, but it's just the whole country is glowing at this point. The parade's tomorrow. So, I'm ready to go.
There you go. Get excited. Well, Drake dropped 2 new singles. So after they won.
There you go.
There you go. So celebrate with that. Anyways, it's interesting that God's shining down on you because NOS4A2 is certainly not a show that he would shine down on, especially with all of the child kidnapping and abuse that's going on in there. But so this week we're talking about episode number 3, The Gas Mask Man, which is obviously referring to Bing Partridge, who is the gas mask man whenever he goes out and does stuff for Charlie Manx. And so this was a really solid episode, I think. Before we get a little bit too deep into the weeds here, just kind of what were your overall thoughts of the episode, Mike?
This was the first episode that hooked me. There were definitely parts of the first 2, and we discussed this on the other shows. Parts of the other 2 where I went, okay, I'll keep watching.
Right.
But this entire episode was one where I was like, I need to keep watching this episode, which was the first time I think in this series where I was like, I'm intrigued almost the entire time, right? So it's definitely better built, maybe a little better written, definitely better constructed in terms of what you see on the screen. So so far this is my favorite episode. Yeah,
and I would actually go as far as to say it was better directed. Not that the previous 2 episodes weren't well directed, but this is the first episode where we have a new director at the helm. So the previous 2 episodes were directed by I'm going to butcher this name, but it's Kari Skogland. What actually I didn't butcher that, but she's cool. Anyways, she's a Canadian director, and she did the first 2 episodes, and this episode and actually the episode 4 that's going to follow this one, they're both directed by John Sheben. And so I did feel like I noticed a change in direction, not anything like crazy, but there was a subtle change in direction, and I think that Sheben did a better job of tackling some of the more suspenseful elements, especially the opening, which I do want to get into very soon because that was my favorite part of the entire episode, was that opening. And as opposed to the previous 2 episodes, which have kind of had somewhat weak openings, but have kind of tried to do a similar thing, it was really nice to finally see them give us a pretty chilling and ghoulish opening, which is what we would expect from a show like this. But anyways, let's get into this episode. The way this whole thing works is Mike kind of gives us, he kind of takes us along a journey here, telling us what happened in the episode, and we pause and we break down certain elements, and we talk about certain things, and then we give our final thoughts at the end. So without further ado, let's get into this episode. Mike, the floor is yours.
Well, it's like you said, suspensefully put together. It's beautifully put together in terms of the suspense. So it opens in a retirement home, and we're kind of wondering, okay, well, what's going on? And we see this elderly woman who kind of wakes up and she's sensing something, and you can tell she's really uneasy. She doesn't say anything. It seems like she can't really talk. She's not necessarily just paralyzed with fear, but there is definitely something evil coming in. And we start to see more and more shots of this retirement home. We see a security guard who's watching the cameras.
Is it a retirement home or is it a psych ward? Because I couldn't figure, they didn't like, I think they mentioned it briefly once, but I didn't know, because he had to sign in for something. And so it felt more like a medical facility, but I wasn't entirely sure.
No, you could be absolutely right. Yeah. So maybe I wish I saw more of it then, because being really the only person you see in whatever this building was, I actually just assumed it was kind of assisted living or something like that. But you might be absolutely right. Yeah.
Right. For sure.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is then some supernatural things start to occur, which is great, I feel like we needed this in the first episode, because as we watch more, there's a power outage, first of all. She starts to freak out a little more. The security guard, radios, somebody said, do you have any power? And they said, nope, the whole building's out. Okay, interesting. Then all of a sudden we start to notice that the temperature just plummets so that you can even see her breath in the room. And again, you're like, okay, this is interesting. Then we see footsteps of who we assume is Manx. And he's kind of stalking, and he's a shadowy figure. We see bits and pieces of him. Like you said, he signs in, which I love. That was such a lovely touch, isn't it?
It's great.
There's something really interesting about this character, and we kind of touched on that too. How because he is a vampire, because he's a succubus, that there is this archetypal charm that follows these characters. That, like you said, I think in the first episode we did, like Dracula always seduces his victims, and Charlie's charm is that he does have manners in a sense. You know what I mean? Like he does seem like a friendly old man, but he is just so creepy and twisted, obviously, that it becomes villainous. So when he's signing in, just going through the trouble of actually, and he signs his real name, he signs in like he just like, well, I got to follow the rules. You know what I mean?
This is the thing that I like. It's like he goes to sign in, and we just see him write C, and then it cuts away, and we totally know it's him, because there's like a little, we assumed it was him, but there was a little wiggle room where it was like, oh, maybe it's not him, but then you see him write that C, and you're like, oh, it's him. There's something. Yeah, this is awesome. You see the cane and everything. It's great. It is. It's really well done. So he visits this woman, and you can see that they have a history together, because he even says, how long has it been? And he says to her, time has not been kind to you. We also see that he's digressing a little bit. Once again, he's aging. He's not quite as old as he has been in the show, but he's definitely older than, the last soul he took, the little boy in the first episode. Right. So that's starting to wear off. And he discusses, their history together. I haven't seen you in a long time. And he, addresses the fact that in the previous episode, he recognized that, again, a strong creative is kind of using the shorter way, is using their powers. And he's trying to figure out who it is, because he knows it could be a threat to him, and he's wondering what's going on. So, he goes to this woman who obviously was a strong creative before, and he says, was it you? And then he's looking at her, and he's like, obviously it wasn't, because you're this fragile old woman, that it couldn't possibly have been her. But he brings her a present, and within the present are roller skates, which, as we learn later on, because Maggie actually visits this old woman as well, we find out that's her knife. So as much as Vic has her motorcycle and uses that as the knife to get through the bridge and all that kind of stuff, this woman used her roller skates. So he aggressively ties the skates onto this frail woman, really tight. And he says, oh, are you excited? And he picks her up. He's kind of embracing her, right? It's really well done. I think this is Quinto's best scene. I was just about to say, I think Quinto really just got into the character in this scene, and he had a lot of the creepy old makeup on it, but he wasn't quite at that stage where he was like super old man. He was like in the middle between being youthful and old, obviously still being old, and so it was creepy in that regard, but his delivery was allowed to be a little bit more natural, and so just some of his looks and the way he was just totally toying with this woman was just so unsettling, and really enjoyable to watch just from a performance standpoint.
That's right. Yeah. And so this scene, which is the teaser of the episode, ends in, I wasn't quite sure at the time what had happened, but we learned later on, he kind of embraces her and then he drops her pretty aggressively. And it turns out he paralyzed her. So again, this is the Manx that I wanted to see for 2 episodes now, because, we discussed it in the first episode where they had the teaser where, the mother dies and the first child is taken, and you kind of go, well, okay. Yeah, it wasn't overly shocking, but you'd figured they'd really go for that, go for the jugular, no pun intended, to kind of bring that aggression and horror into this show. And this was the first time where I went, yeah, he's not a good dude.
Yeah, right.
We knew before. We knew the stuff he was doing, but I'm like, this is not a nice guy. So
yeah, well, and that's not the only instance where we see him do some like kind of messed up stuff, because he kills I forget the girl's name, but he kills her cat when Bing goes in to take care of the mom or whatever. He just like picks it up by the head and just like cracks its neck, and I'm like, this is just one twisted, fucked up old dude. And like, this was, to me, this Charlie Manx was the star of this episode. Whereas like, I think the past 2 episodes, like the first episode, Vic was definitely the star. The second episode, Bing was definitely the star. This one, even though I don't think he was featured as much as some of the other characters, as per usual, he really did rise to the top as just the best and most enjoyable part of this episode. Really, anytime it wasn't focused on Manx and Bing, I was wanting to get back to them. And that's not to say I don't like the stuff going on with Vic in her home life, which we do get a lot of, or what's going on with Maggie, which I'm still not 100% sold on. But like, with him and Bing, and like seeing how he's manipulating him, and then seeing them, do what we've always heard them talk about, and kidnapping the kids, and seeing Bing kind of take on the role that the first guy had in the first episode. I love that, because it was just all really uncomfortable and creepy stuff.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. So as you touched on, one of the other subplots is Bing becomes, as people have read the book, or as the title would hint at, he becomes the gas mask man, who is very much an imposing figure, because obviously we see Bing, and he's a gentle giant. He's obviously a little simple, but at the same time, we never get any impression of him being a bad person. Right. And we discussed this on last episode. We start to see how Charlie really twists his ideology and makes him believe that he needs to save these children and everything. Right. And there's a great moment where, before this all happens, before he really becomes the gas mask man, where he grabs the little girl who's Vic's, friend that we run into. Right. And he grabs her, and it's the first aggression you see from Bing, and you're like, oh man, so he's really changed. And then again, we touch on the manners. Charlie is like, let her go. We don't mishandle children, which is, again, just the way he says it, and the things he's done, you're like, oh man, that's creepy. Like,
it's weird. He's got like he's got a weird twisted code as in terms of how he does this thing, which is just fascinating to see.
Yeah. So that's a great evolution, I think, for Bing's character, because, like you said, the last episode was all about him. We see him really turn, and he's got a great arc that is more like a wave than an arc, because when he goes to kidnap the little girl and he ends up killing the mother, or at least gassing her, that moment where he puts on the gas mask, where he tapes up, to cover up who he is, because he tapes up his work uniform, and he puts the pipe or the piping underneath the floor, underneath the door, and he kills the mother, and he's holding the door, and she's trying to get out. And it's really not aggressive. It's just, he's like telling her to be quiet and saying, shh, shh. And there's something, again, so unsettling about that, and what we know about Bing, what we know about, Charlie's world, in a sense of always being attracted to lost children, and how Bing himself is a lost child, and you can see that. And so you and I were talking about this before the episode started. We wanted to really give that guy a shout out, because he was definitely, he's been amazing in the 1.5 or 2 episodes that he's really featured in.
Yeah, he really has been.
Yeah, and this performance, I think, in this episode was fantastic too.
Oh, it was great. But I want to kind of backtrack a little bit to that sequence of him actually entering the house when he has the mask on, and you just hear the breathing of it. It was like super Michael Myers in Halloween. They were, we just saw like what he was seeing through the eye holes, and so I thought that added an extra layer of suspense of him entering the house. It was very slasher-esque, which that was the first real moment, other than the opening, which was, I wouldn't even consider the opening horror. It was more like atmospheric, like creepiness, I guess you could say. With just a really powerful performance by Quinto. This was like the first moment in this show where I was like, oh, this is kind of a horror show, you know, with him being having that slash, doing like going into the house and you know, gassing the mom and the kid and abducting her and stuff like that. That was, I thought that Shiben did a great job of building the tension in that scene. I think I would have liked a little bit more, but like I still felt it, and then ultimately you know, intersplicing that with kind of Manx waiting outside and then killing the cat. Like that whole sequence to me was the highlight. Well, second highlight of this episode. That opening, for whatever reason, just to me, like really knocked my socks off, and it set up beautifully the feeling of this episode, which is really carried over in that final you know, abduction sequence. But anyways, just kind of getting back to the point, I loved that they were drawing from classic slashers like Halloween to invoke like a horror feel. It was just very much appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely right. And you know, touching on the direction, what you had said about the opening sequence and what you had said about what was successful about this one is, less is more, I think. Yeah. And you know, ironically, in the first two episodes, different director, less was less. You know, they showed showed little and we got little out of it. And in this one, they showed little and yet we got way more out of it. And it is that kind of classic trope almost in terms of horror filmmaking, where you just show bits and pieces of what's happening, and it's enough to make it unsettling because you're not quite clear what exactly is happening, so it builds up the tension. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. It was like we had said, it's a much better crafted episode by far. Yeah.
What did you think of, because we got a lot of Manx as like the really old guy there. Did Quinto's voice still bug you?
We got it again. And I got to be honest, it's the only thing that kind of bugs me about his performance is when he's that old, right? It's one of those choices. It almost seems like something they should have fixed in post, you know, like I can understand if that helps him embody the character, but it doesn't seem natural for sure. And it's not intimidating for me. And considering that, you know, an ancient immortal vampire should be somewhat intimidating, or there's just different directions he could go. Because like we've mentioned before, his younger iteration, we just found kind of delicious is the best word.
That's the best word for it.
Because like you said, there was that teeth chattering moment, and he embodies that perfectly. So for the older one, which arguably is the most desperate version that we see, because he's got maybe less time, you know, to really survive or to, you know, find the next victim and all this kind of stuff. You'd like to see a little bit more. I'd like to see something a little more natural and intimidating. So that voice still kind of takes me out of things a little bit.
Yeah. The other, I would probably agree with you. It's something where it's like after he's been doing it for a little while, I'm kind of used to it, but I agree with you. It's still just like a creative choice where I go, I think you could have done something better with that. But the other thing that I really liked, and this is going back a little, we're kind of jumping all over the place, but kind of sticking around the same two characters. After Bing grabs the little girl, Manx, you know, he kind of snaps at Bing, and that's the first real moment where like Bing himself questions like his ability to do the job, and he's kind of terrified for a bit. And I found that to be a really interesting dynamic. And you know, that's obviously something that it's kind of gonna be explored a little bit later on in the show. But it was just, it goes back to like him having a code, and he doesn't, you know, someone fucks up like once, like one or two times, like boom, they're done. He doesn't have time for it, because you were talking about that desperation of the older Manx, and so it's just it's just another cool layer to the character that I think Quinto really brings to life.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah. And, you know, while we're at it, we can talk about the other subplot, which is Vic trying to get into the art school. Yeah. Right. Because that crosses over, because, there's the subplot of she's trying to get into the school. She's not sure how she's going to pay for it. She's finally made the decision. She wants to go to the school. And so we see her online. She's applying for financial aid. And then, of course, she discovers, oh, my God, I need all this stuff. I need my parents' tax returns, all this kind of stuff. So we'll get to that, but more importantly, there is a scene where she goes back to her art school, or at least one of the art classes she's taking, and she talks to Bing, and that's exactly when he says what you were talking about, where he says, "Oh, I really messed up at work. I've got a new job, and my boss wasn't happy." And I like that because once again, the previous episode really ended that story with Bing being like, "Oh my God, yes, we have to save these kids," and then in this one, he's like, I disappointed this guy. Like, and part of you is like, no, Bing, it's okay, man. Like, you can screw up. We don't want him to die or get hurt, obviously, but we're like, it's okay that you messed up. So that was another great moment. And you know what? Again, what they've been able to do in the last 3 episodes, the only 3 episodes at this point, to build that relationship between Vic and Bing, I think is really good. To build that friendship, right?
Right.
Very few scenes together, but you kind of see the connection.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you said it perfectly. We don't see it a lot, but when we do see it, we really do see them connect, and they're able to just speak openly to each other, not necessarily in like a deep way, but in like a comfortable manner. But I'll tell you what, for whatever reason, man, during that sequence, and like I know like stuff that happens in the book, but still taking the book out of it, during that sequence, I was a little on edge. I thought he was gonna lock her in the room, grab Manx or something, like, just some sort of thing to make up for the mistake that he made. Like maybe he found out, like she said something that would have indicated that she was the one that they're looking for. And so like during that walk in the hallway, like even though it's just very simple and very, they're not doing anything to create like a creepy atmosphere, I felt uneasy because of how the episode was structured, because of what you had just seen before here. It was another really great directorial choice.
Yeah. And the irony of that whole situation being that in that moment where she just loses her sketchbook, they have a conversation and it's like 2 minutes down the hallway. And once again, it's Vic's nature talking to Bing and saying, you can do whatever you want, man. Like you can do it. Don't worry. She doesn't know. She has no clue what she's cheering him on to do. Right. But again, it just shows her character. And then that next sequence is the one we were talking about, where he really becomes the gas mask man, where he's like, I can do this. I'm going to put my mind to it.
She encourages him. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, without knowing, obviously. But the other thing I liked about this sequence is that was the first time, Vic felt really in control talking to someone. Like it felt like she was really confident in the advice she was giving him. And it was the first time, or maybe the first time, I don't know, but it was a time where, she felt confident giving the advice, but we saw that she doesn't necessarily take her own advice, because if all she has to do is listen to what she's telling Bing, and she could theoretically be, scot-free. And so like it's just once again, it's just an interesting character decision that makes Vic a more complex character. So like that was a nice touch as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, it mirrors, as I was mentioning, that the subplot that she has, which is just trying to get into school. There's really nothing supernatural about what's happening. She has some flashes in this episode, and she meets up with Maggie again at a certain point. And we should kind of touch on Maggie's very quick contribution.
As per usual.
Honestly, there's a good introduction. Well, she gets some I shouldn't say good. That made me sound like so inappropriate. It's just funny. We see some more of Maggie.
Right.
Right.
She's with another girl in the library.
Right. She gets some fun, sexy time. And then it's funny because her tiles call to her, which apparently never happens. Right. So she's like, I got to go, because she picks up on something.
Right.
And then she goes and she starts to, untangle or unscramble the words in the tiles. And it says that the Wraith is now hunting. So she has to get a hold of Vic, and she wants to see what's going on. And then Vic, we see early in the episode that she has these flashes of Gas Mask Man and other things that are happening. And,
the freaking kid and Manx, and some of those flashes were actually really well done. Like they weren't like startling or anything, but it was creepy imagery similar to that opening, which we haven't gotten necessarily thus far.
Right. Yeah, absolutely right. And you know what? Again, it's really growing the relationship between she and Maggie, which is pivotal because,
It
you know,
is. Yeah.
Maggie is, you know, kind of the Yoda to Vic in a sense. She
Yeah. Yeah.
unravels the world and lets her know what's happening. Obviously going to help her with her powers and really sort things out and all this kind of stuff. We also see Maggie visit the elderly lady in the beginning of the episode
Right.
because
Which
she's
that was,
starting to pick.
yeah.
That was a pretty good scene,
That was a
right?
good
And
scene.
that was the only thing that I didn't like. It was I felt like that was the weakest writing of the episode because it was just all exposition. It was stuff that we pretty much knew.
Yeah, as for I like theoretically, I like the scene. In execution, it was just like the old woman not saying anything, and then Maggie just throwing around a bunch of buzzwords like knife, the
Right.
shorter way.
Right.
What is what they call the people, the
Strong
the
creatives.
strong creatives, yeah, which is
Yeah.
it's just kind of a weird name, but whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, she's just like throwing around all these buzzwords, and the woman's just like giving her glances, and like
Right.
it doesn't really work that well,
No,
but like I understand why.
It seemed like a reminder to the audience was like, don't forget these terms.
Yeah,
Like, these are terms that we need. Right?
what it
Yeah.
was like. And like when you like think of this scene on paper, it should work better than it does. I think they actually needed to give a little bit more time to that scene, and make it more suspenseful. This was an instance where I think they needed to add more suspense in, because we not only, you know, it's not only what's her face just throwing around Maggie throwing around buzzwords, it's us getting a look inside, you know, what Manx does to these creatives, and so like we get a little bit of her story in there as well. And I think I don't know, like had the tension been built up a little bit more, and they would have made that scene a little bit slower, I guess, because it does feel a bit rushed, that scene, to
Right.
me. Yeah, if they had just taken their time a little bit, added more suspense, I think it would have been a lot better.
I think that's Maggie in a nutshell in this show so
Really
far. Like every
is.
scene she's
Yeah,
in,
yeah.
yeah. And you know, the other funny thing is she has one scene where she's talking to the sheriff again, and the sheriff just kind of blurts out, "Well, you're the closest thing I have to a daughter," and I kind of went, "Okay." Like you just accept it.
Yeah,
but you
right.
just
It's like,
never
I
go,
don't actually buy that. I mean, nothing,
Yeah.
nothing, like no scene where the two of you have been interacting has led me to believe that you feel this way.
Right.
I once again, maybe in like the previous two episodes, if we had one scene where they actually have like a heart to heart or something. I know we had that one moment where she was in the precinct, like telling him about like a past case or something like that, but I never got like, oh, these two are really close and he cares for her and wants to look out for her. It's, to me, the weakest part of this show is Maggie and all of that stuff, because I understand not wanting to devote time to it, because she is definitely the least interesting thing, but there are interesting parts to her arc, such as her talking to this old woman about being a creative and like what Manx does, and her relationship with the cop, and like her solving all of these cases. Like there are things that they can highlight about her character that are interesting. It's just they kind of breeze through it in order to get to Vic and Manx, which I understand, but at the same time, if you're going to have someone like Maggie be as integral of a character as they are, you need to devote the time to really build her up.
You're right. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, hopefully they do that in future episodes. Yeah. Some of us know, some of us don't. But, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, at this point, though, you can't throw away character moments that she has. And this was one where, like you said, if they'd slowed it down or developed it a little further, it would have been a lot better. But, yeah, I mean, it's Maggie in a nutshell, because whenever we see her, it's a 5-minute scene. She throws out a whole bunch of exposition to explain what's going on in the world. Yeah. You know, even the fact that she's a lesbian was just kind of like, oh, okay, so all right, great, they're making out, they're doing this, and then it's done in like 10 seconds, and you're kind of like, they literally just threw that in to let you know something about the character, right? And it was just kind of like, okay, that's fun and all, I guess, but it was just like throwing something away, right? So far, everything that Maggie's in has been like, well, I need to explain something, and then she's thrown away, right?
And I'm hoping moving forward, because it looks like they're setting up there, like her and Vic's relationship to be a lot more intertwined, I guess you can say. So like we'll get a lot more of Maggie through her interactions with Vic, is what I'm hoping going forward.
Yeah, for sure. Especially because we know Vic is really learning how few mentors she has in life,
Yeah,
right? And I think that's another thing. This was a really good episode to touch on her family life again, which I think has been one of the most consistently good threads throughout the first three episodes.
Yeah.
We got to see how deadbeat both parents are, how, as much as I've talked about the father being a really well balanced character because he's not sympathetic in a lot of ways, because he was alcoholic, because he ran away from the family, because he abused, Vic's mom. But he's still, in a sense, a loving father. We see, in this episode how they both they don't even return their taxes since what do you say, 2005,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So Vic can't apply for financial aid unless she lies and forges a signature. And this was the first time where I'm watching this, and even knowing what I knew about the character of the father, where I'm watching it and I'm going, yeah, he's not really a good father. He loves it.
Yeah, they don't care. They're just kind of they wing it. They're like, oh, she's not going to do anything with her life, so why do we care?
Yeah, and he, especially because when he's encouraging her, follow your dreams and all that kind of stuff, but then he's constantly getting in the way of these dreams, exactly. Right? Like something stupid.
Yeah, he's all talk and no actions. He wants to appear supportive, but he actually isn't. And I think she's starting to catch on to that, because ultimately at the end of the episode, she has to forge his signature for the financial aid stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so.
Long pause.
And all right, moving on. Yeah, all right. Going back to, I guess this is the perfect way to go into Vic's arc, if you will, because we haven't really touched. We touched on it briefly, but she goes on a trip to RISD, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so she goes to see the art school. She has to go back to her well-off friend who, threw the party in the first episode, and that's where we see Vic really uncomfortable. We also see that kind of slimy but a little trustworthy rich guy who was charming her in the first episode. I'm not sure what the character's name is. I totally forget. He goes on it. The only thing I didn't like about this episode really was that 80s montage that they had when they were at the school, and they're pointing and laughing, and he's like, hey, look over there, and they're doing a tour of the college, and you're kind of okay, can we go back to the vampire, the big dude kidnapping?
For everything I liked about this episode, there was a weird sort of transition where she got in the car on that trip to going to RISD, and it felt like a different movie. It felt like some sort of teen. It felt very CW, that scene. That sequence felt very CW, and I'm like, oh, come on, guys, we're better than this. We're on AMC. I understand that this show has teen drama and it's got some camp in it and whatnot, but this whole sequence, I'm just I don't care, I guess. I care about Vic and everything that's going on there, but I don't care about her interactions with Dick Wad McGee and whatever. I understand his purpose of trying to comfort her and make her feel better, and I'm sure they're setting up some sort of romantic seeds there that are probably going to let her down, because he's not going to be this good guy that he's claiming to be, or maybe they're going to go the other route and he's going to be the good guy actually, but I don't know. It's just that whole thing to me was just meh. The one part I did like, though, because it felt very real, was when she went into the financial aid office and she dropped her portfolio and she's like, oh, you don't really need that, and then the person's like, so this is how you can get financial aid without tax returns. You can either be in the military, be an orphan, or what was it, be a victim of abusive parents or something like that. And then she starts going on about how her rich friend's mom kind of let her in on a possible domestic life issue, and that you see Vic totally just defeated by that, and she runs out. That I like that because it's a good character moment for Vic, and then you see her running through the campus, and we see the flashes of Manx and Gas Mask Man and the kid and stuff like that, and her eyes throbbing, and so basically the world is kind of coming down upon her in that moment, and then on top of all that, she gets the call that her friend is in danger, I guess, or something like that, or she was abducted, and so Yeah, like Vic is faced with a lot of obstacles this episode, and so I am looking forward to seeing how she overcomes them in the next episode, which I'm really hoping that the next episode is going to be the one where Manx and Bing try to get her, because that's my favorite part of the book. Without giving,
nice.
Well, it's my favorite part of the book thus far.
Right.
Without giving anything away, there is just a really great sequence that they're building up to, and I think I'm really hoping it's either going to be next episode or the episode after, because it's a critical moment for all three of those characters involved. Bing, well, actually, Bing's not involved in the book, but anyways, it's critical for Manx and Vic. But yeah, I digress. I just kind of went on a tangent there.
No, it's good. I mean, like you said, it really sets up a couple episodes. I don't think it's just the next one, but it could be, we're almost halfway through the season. What is coming, and more importantly, I think the end of this episode really kind of ups the stakes a little bit. Definitely. In terms of her personal life, in terms of her powers, and how she's starting to really piece things together a little bit more. Like you said, the flashes, she figures out what the message that Maggie got, that Maggie warned her about, was actually, she knew where to go. And obviously it's much more personal. It's personal this time.
Where they're back for episode 4. This time it's personal.
Exactly. So yeah, we see that her little friend's in trouble. So yeah, looking forward to the next one. For the first time, it's more than I'll watch the next one. It's okay. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Actually, I want to see the next one. Which I think that's a great punctuation mark to just kind of close off this discussion. Obviously, we both kind of talked about it at the beginning. We think this is by far the best episode the show has seen thus far, and I hope they just keep on getting better from here, which from people who have seen, into future episodes and have actually watched those episodes, not talking about you, but other people that I have just seen on the internet, they really do enjoy where the show kind of goes from here. Episode 3 seems to be the turning point, and then the show just really picks up from here, which is good. That's what I want. I don't want us to be 3 episodes in and for us to be like, I don't care anymore, which I understand. Like, some people have already checked out, and I get it. Like, it's like those first 2 episodes are kind of wishy-washy. There's some good stuff in there, but they're not as strong as this one. So yeah, there you have it. Do you have any more, final closing thoughts on your end?
No, that was perfect. Yeah, because we had discussed how if they, in a sense, repeated what they had done in the first 2 episodes with this one in terms of tone and pacing, I think they would have lost any viewers that were still around. You know what I mean? Like, because a lot of viewers were like, I'll give it a chance. But by episode 3, you've given it a chance. And for the first time, I think they really rewarded the viewers. They did. With the things that happened. Yeah. So.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a turnaround.
Great stuff all around. Well, that's going to do it for our recap of NOS4A2 episode number 3, The Gas Mask Man. I want to thank Mike again for joining me. Mike, where can everyone find you?
Well, you can find me on YouTube at Real School, Twitter at Real School, or Instagram at real.school. Remember, there's 2 E's in Real. The best kept secret on YouTube. Just look for a Canadian YouTube dude. It's me. I think there's one other. No, there's probably more. I'm just kidding. But
I feel like you need to integrate like the Canadian flag into your branding somehow. It seems to be your thing. You're like, we're Real School, but here's the catch. We're the best kept secret on YouTube because we're Canadian or something like that. It's
a funny thing. And you know what? I've leaned into it several times because, to be honest, I don't see a lot of Canadian reviewers out there. I know the Canadian community around me, definitely in terms of the Toronto film critics and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm like, I'll lean into it as an identity and make some stupid like maple syrup jokes. Why the hell not? Right. So yeah, whatever gets people watching.
Well, there you go, guys. If you want more dry Canadian wit, you can head on over to Real School. And if you liked this video or anything we had to say, be sure to consider giving this video a like, sharing it with your other friends who may watch NOS4A2, and subscribe to the Men vs. Movies YouTube channel for more movie and television related content such as this on a weekly basis. You can like Men vs. Movies on Facebook, follow us on Twitter simply by searching Men vs. Movies. And lastly, if you like me specifically and and you like what I have to say, you can give me a follow on Twitter at Griff Schiller. All right, that's going to do it for this NOS4A2 recap, and we will catch you next week. Take care.